Welcome to Shapes of Grief, everybody. I am delighted this week to be joined by Dr. Mekel Harris. You're very welcome, Mekel.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. It is an incredible honor and privilege to be on your podcast. I really appreciate this opportunity.
It's kind of you. Well, I'm delighted you're here as well. So for listeners, just to introduce Mekel to you, Mekel is originally from Texas and spent many years working in LA as a clinical psychologist, and now is living in Memphis, Tennessee, the home of Martin Luther King. And you are working as a clinical psychologist in a local children's hospital, Mekel, and you also have a private practice supporting people who are grieving or going through loss of any kind.
That's right. Yes, keeps me very busy, but I'm thankful for it.
So, Mekel, something happened in your life that made you take a turn of what you focused on professionally in your career. You had been working with children who had chronic health conditions, and now you focus on grief and loss. What happened in 2012?
Yeah, so 2012 was an interesting year. My mom, who had been a registered nurse and a nursing professor for many years, was always focused on us as kids, my brother and I, taking care of our health. And it just so happened that earlier in 2012, she started to experience some health challenges of her own. She suffered a stroke in the spring of 2012, but my mom, being who she was, soldiered through that and continued to enjoy semi-retirement and just live her life. And it wasn't until November 2012 that, as a result of not feeling quite herself, she drove herself to an emergency room, at which time they told her, "We need to admit you right now." And about a week into November 2012, she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, followed by 30 days after that, dying. So you can only imagine that my family's life was literally turned upside down in a month. And that was only the beginning of this grief journey that I've been on for almost 8 years now.
So, Mekel, you said there, my mom being who she was, kept going. Who was she? Tell us what her name was and what sort of a person was she?
Yeah, her name is Patricia Ann Harris. A better question for me, honestly, is what wasn't she? My mom was, as I said, a registered nurse. She was a feisty Gemini, outspoken. When she walked into a room, there was something about her presence that just lit it up in terms of not only her smile, but just her wisdom. And she was a person who was fiercely loyal. So I kind of joke that when she died, it was like losing a mom, a best friend, an advocate, a husband, a listening ear, and so much more. It was so tremendous to experience her loss because she represented so much in my life, and served in so many ways.
And did you know that when she was alive?
That she served in all.
Did you appreciate all of that about her when she was alive, or was it through the loss that you really understood the profundity of your relationship to her?
Yeah, so my mom and I always had a very intimate relationship. We were the type of mom and daughter who talked probably too much, maybe about 6-7 times a day, every single day. And we loved having these marathon conversations. So it wasn't uncommon for us to be on the phone anywhere from 5 to 24 hours, literally 24 hours. Wow. Fall asleep, wake back up, get back into the conversation. That's just who we were. So I knew that about her before she died. I will say that several of my mom's students came to her memorial service, and just listening to their reflections gave me another glimpse into who she was. There were so many stories about students who had gone through really challenging times in their personal lives, and they went to my mom, and she was, a person who offered them prayer, sometimes food, and other clothing, just thing. I knew she was generous, but to hear those stories of so
Mm.
many behind the scenes conversations she had with people to uplift them was incredible. My mom was incredible.
What would you talk about for 24 hours? I'm intrigued.
We usually started off with just a general check-in,
Yeah.
and my mom was a storyteller, right? So I knew that no conversation with her would be less than an hour. But just starting off with the basics, and before you knew it, we'd be talking about our family, and she would recount stories from the past growing up, and then I would share some things, and before you knew it, we had lost track of time. One funny story, I remember this was about in 2007 or so. She and I took a drive to Florida, and we were driving back, or we were driving to Florida, and literally got so caught up in our conversation that we missed the exit by 2 hours.
Oh
That's how.
gosh. Don't tell me
That's
you ended up in New York, please.
yeah, no, that's how captivating she was, and that's how
Amazing.
enthralled everybody who interacted with her was. Like, you literally
Yeah.
were so in the moment that you lost track of time. So it wasn't uncommon for us to end up in these long conversations on the phone.
What a gift. And it's lovely to know Patricia in this way through you, because it gives us a sense of what the grief might have been like. What a big deal it was for you to lose this person in your life who was your mom, your best friend, your husband, your confidant, your mentor.
Yep, yeah,
Yeah.
she was so much, and it's really weird. In December will be 8 years since she died, and in some ways, I still feel like I am understanding the gravity of it all. As you know, grief can kind of slowly peel back its layers, and there are moments I struck with, wow, like what a tremendous loss, right? The thing that kind of helps me keep going is to consider she was so many things. What an incredible gift that I had to have a mom who was amazing
Mm.
as an educator, as a woman of faith, as a listener, as a sounding board, as an advocate, all these things that I know some people don't experience. And so that's what helps me kind of ground myself in those moments when I feel that weight.
Yeah. And that's something that takes time to be able to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to we have to feel the grief to be able to then look back with the love and appreciation, I think. So a tremendous loss for you. And you've mentioned that to look back with gratitude is what helps you push through. How long did it take you to get to that point? Because it's very difficult to access the love and the appreciation and the gratitude when we're flooded with grief.
Mm-hmm. One of the greatest gifts, and I'm going to use the word gifts very loosely, that I believe God gave me. I'm a woman of faith. And about 2 months before my mom died, I had a dream with her in it. And in the dream, my mom, I never saw her in the dream, but he offered me kind of an understanding that she wasn't well. And in the dream, he offered me a date, which was December 7th. I didn't know exactly what that meant at the time. Again, this was before her diagnosis, but I knew within myself, like just deep within my soul, that December 7th was going to be a pivotal moment. And my brother, who is an intensive care unit nurse, I shared it with him and came to the conclusion, if you will, that something was going to take a turn for the worse with regard to her health. So a part of me started off the grief journey. I don't want to say with an appreciation, but definitely it wasn't shocking when the moment came that we got the diagnosis. And it wasn't shocking that what December 7th ended up being was the last day that my mom spoke.
Ah,
She died on December 9th, but December 7th was the day she spoke. And so for that, I immediately felt gratitude in the sense that I had almost been a little bit prepared for that moment. So it wasn't as rattling. Now, obviously on the heels of that, there was a lot of unraveling of my emotions and just the physical and the spiritual challenges that I faced. The full appreciation, I think, started to come probably, or not the full, but the beginning of appreciation started to come probably about a year and a half after she died, as I felt this tug on my heart to open up about her death and to write a story and to
Yeah.
be able to share that with other people as a way to bless them and as a way to begin the healing process for myself.
And you called that memoir Relaxing into the Pain. I
Hmm.
love that.
Thank you.
I
I
love
can't take
that.
credit for it. Yeah, I can't take credit for the title. Um, the title was actually born out of me meeting with a therapist. So, probably about 4 months after my mom died, I, to kind of flash back, I was working in academia, extremely busy lifestyle. I was traveling all over the world, presenting and doing different things, and a lot of responsibilities in private practice all at the same time. And after my mom's death, we had Christmas break. And so I had about 3 weeks at home in Texas to be with my brother, to help settle affairs. But I knew that the beginning of January, I had to get back into kind of the rat race of my life and my job. About 3 or 4 months into that process, things were starting to unravel. My sleep, which had never really been excellent, was really impaired, partly related to the way my mom died. And I was feeling fatigued, I was feeling overwhelmed, but the main thing was I was feeling incredibly irritable about every single thing, and it was starting to affect my relationship. So I decided I need to go talk to someone. Of course, I was a psychologist, so I knew the benefit of reaching out to a mental health professional. And over a series of talking to her, I started asking these questions about, when am I going to get through this? When am I going to start to experience some uplift? And the question that she asked in a therapy session about midway through was, Mekel, what would it look like if you simply relaxed into the pain of it all,
Yeah.
as opposed to fighting it? And I did know in that moment that, because I wasn't thinking about a book at that point, but a year and a half down the road, I thought, wow, that's exactly what Amy had said sitting on the couch, was relax into the pain. And I decided that that would be the title for my book.
And really the very best advice or invitation that anybody can give to somebody who's grieving,
Yeah.
because we do these fabulous dances around our grief rather than go through it.
Yeah.
And the only
Yeah.
way to grieve, is to sit and feel it and go through it.
Well, and what was so ironic was I was working, as I mentioned, in private practice with kids with chronic health issues. And there were so many moments in my career leading up to that point where I would sit with kids that in a hospital setting or a healthcare setting, and they would be, about to experience a medical procedure. And of course, the kids were scared and they were tensing up and did not necessarily want to experience it. And I would always tell them, take a deep breath. The tighter you are, right? Like the more stiff your body is and the tighter you squeeze, the more painful it's going to be. And so it was really ironic that with a grief, from a metaphorical perspective, that's exactly what I felt like I needed to do, was just relax into the pain of it all. Not that there would be no pain, but I would experience it differently than I would if I just decided to sidestep it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your grief was like, because your mother filled so many roles in your life, and she sounds like she was this larger than life, tremendous character who must have left such a void when she died.
Yeah. I remember going back to Los Angeles from Texas, and the time that my mom and I talked the most, we talked so many times a day, but the two key points were driving to work and driving from work. And so I was on the 101, um, coming from some business, career thing. And I remember sitting in the car, and my automatic reflex every single day was to call my mom. And so there I was on the freeway in horrible traffic, and I picked up my cell phone and dialed my mom's number just because it was, an automatic thing. And at that point, her phone was still on. It hadn't been disconnected. So I dialed it. It went to voicemail. And as soon as I was about to leave a voicemail, all of a sudden it hits me. Oh my God, she's never going to answer the phone again. And that was a hard moment.
Mm.
That was a long, long drive home. And I ended up calling my brother, and thankfully he was available and spent the next couple of hours with me just crying and just expressing just very deep sadness at the reality that I would not hear her voice anymore, especially in moments where I thought I would need it later on down the line.
It's such a part of the process, isn't it, that we lose them hundreds of times, if not thousands of times. It's in every moment where you go to phone them, then go,
Yeah.
or every moment you think you see the back of their head in the supermarket, and then you remember. It's like our body needs to do it over and over again before the penny finally drops that they're gone. And I think even when we can accept that they're dead, then there's this whole other thing that comes in sometimes in year two, the permanency of that. Not only are they dead and have I accepted that, but they're gone forever. They're never coming back. They're never going to answer the phone. And that can be almost as shocking as the original death sometimes. Do you relate
Absolutely.
to that at all?
I do. I think what's been hardest for me, even now, is realizing that my mom, as I've reached different heights in my career, she was never able to see that. As I have entered into a relationship and experienced love and things that she wanted to see when she was here, she won't be able to see that. As I think about children, she won't be able to see that. And the list goes on and on. So, to your point about these reminders of grief and kind of experiencing death upon death upon death, it is. Just the other day, I was driving from my practice and passed a road that just happened to be called Patricia Lane.
Yeah.
And I'm looking up at the stop sign and the street sign, and all of a sudden I hear a honk behind me. Well, it's the person saying, hurry up and move on. And I realize that I'm sitting there in tears, in a puddle of tears, almost 8 years later. So there are definitely moments where it just suddenly shocks you. And for me, on the days when I think it's going to show up, like Mother's Day or my mom's birthday, which happens to be this Sunday, for some reason, those are the days that I'm okay. It's all the other days
Yeah.
that literally come out of the woods and scare me and overwhelm me when I least expect it.
It's a good point, isn't it? I was talking to someone the other day who was going through a 6-month anniversary of the loss of her spouse, and it was okay, but I was giving the warning of it mightn't be okay tomorrow. Sometimes we are psyched up to get through the birthday or the anniversary, and then we get to the other side, breathe a sigh of relief, and then boom, bang.
Yeah.
But back to what you were saying there, Mekel, about you're in a relationship now, you'd love to have children, your career has taken off, all these things your mom, you would have loved her to see and she would have loved to have seen.
Right.
How do you keep her with you? Where's the bond with her now? How do you bring her in?
So my mom had a saying literally across all situations. My mom had been just a survivor of health issues before. So leading up to this cancer diagnosis, she had suffered a series of mini strokes and suffered a major stroke in those months before she died. In addition to that, she had survived Crohn's disease, 2 divorces, and a host of other challenges that I'm sure she never even told me about. And so my mom was absolutely a fighter. And one of her common phrases was, you have to get up and put on your big girl panties. And that's one of the ways that I remind myself, especially in moments where grief gets hard and I want to lay down. And I'm not going to lie, it happens more often than I wanted to. But I think about her and I said, you know what? What would mama have done? And that phrase, you got to get up and put on your big girl panties, just continues to propel me. And then I realized that,
I've just had a shiver down my spine, and I think I'm going to be taking on that phrase from your mama as well.
yeah, yeah, it, if I could think of one thing that she said, it was that. And then the other thing that that I realized, right, is that I didn't want my mom to just physically die, right? I knew that physically she wasn't here, but it dawned on me, if I stop talking about her and if I stop living and if I stop encouraging other people to ask about her and allow her to be part of my current experience, even if it just is a conversation, then not only is she physically dead, but she's completely gone, right?
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that encourages me when I want to stop is I can't, because she'll die completely then, right? Right now, even talking with you, she's here and I can sense that because we're talking about
Yeah.
her. So that helps keep me going on the hard days for sure.
Hmm. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And I can
Yeah.
just imagine Patricia, get on your big girl panties.
Put
And
on your big girl pants.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so she was
Yeah.
a fighter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very wise, very strong. Like literally the strongest person that I have ever known. My mom went through a lot, and every day, even when she probably didn't feel like it, um, she kept going. What's funny is now my brother and I kind of think about. I wonder if she knew. Like my mom was very in tune with her body. I said that she was a nurse,
Yeah.
and looking back, he and I kind of have talked about there's no way that she was not in tune with her body. And I don't know if she decided, you know what, I'm going to keep that from them, or if it literally startled her like it did us at the beginning of November 2012. But regardless, it just spoke to the type of woman who she was. Um, the other thing that my mom gave my brother and I up until the very end was the fact that even though she was a larger than life person, it wasn't important to her to be the center of attention. And so the night that she died, my brother and I were with her, and we were laying in the bed with her. And we had made a pact that no matter what, we weren't going to fall asleep. Well, of course, it's midnight, it's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and we drifted off. And that's when my mom decided to slip away, right, and transition. And that was so like her, because she never wanted to be the center of attention. And I think when she felt that we were safe and that we were resting and it was a peaceful exit, she took it. And that, again, just so like her,
It's so
totally fit with who she was.
beautiful. My goodness.
Yeah.
Dying between your two sleeping children.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had decided that, she was there for our births, and whatever the cost, we were going to be there at her death. So we chose to do it that way. And my mom wanted to be at home around the things and the people who she loved, and she got that. So it's pretty amazing that she
Did
got
that,
to get what she wanted.
did that help your grief, Mekel, afterwards to know that she had such a peaceful death and that you were both there? Did it make a difference?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Um, Definitely being able to be skin to skin with my mom was huge, because well, I wouldn't say she was the most affectionate person, but she definitely, I can think of so many moments where we'd sit on the side of her bed and she'd brush my hair or, just massage my face. And so being able to touch her meant a lot. On the other hand, the fact that we were with her when she died in her bed was very hard in the years after she died. I mentioned that sleep had always been an issue for me, and it
Yeah.
became a little bit more traumatic, honestly, at night. She passed away around 3 a.m. And so for about a year and a half after she died, guess what? That's when I was waking up,
Yeah.
turning over, and realizing she's not there. So that was really hard. And part of the process of therapy for me was kind of working through my sleep and kind of reclaiming
Yeah.
bed as a safe place that I didn't associate with death. So that was hard.
It's such a really good point you're making here, though, because, you know, like I've just done, I'm sure many people would say, oh, isn't it great? You were there with her and isn't it lovely? Yet here you are having this experience of trauma because you fell asleep and you didn't want to. And somewhere in your nervous system, it was saying if you fall asleep, someone dies.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes, it was totally
you know,
activated.
if the death can be totally peaceful, it can still
Mm-hmm.
be really traumatic for someone because of some aspect of it, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And
One
even
of the
you can have a traumatic death, but it doesn't mean that the bereaved family are experiencing trauma either. It's just
exactly.
mm,
Exactly. I mean, I think they can certainly be intertwined and interconnected, and they can also be separate issues that kind of erupt related to the death. One thing that really helped me reframe that 3 o'clock hour was to focus in on my faith. So I was waking up at 3. Obviously, you know, I wasn't really supposed to be getting up until like 6:37. So I was waking up about 6 months into this angry, like, when am I going to sleep? This is affecting every area. And I mentioned that I was already irritable. And so, of course, not sleeping made it so much worse. But one of the things that in therapy I learned to do was to treat that 3 o'clock hour almost as an invitation from God.
mm,
And instead of just looking at it as, I'm just mad, I'm going to be here frustrated in the bed, it was an opportunity in the wee hours of the night when no one, right, was awake, for me to be able to pour out the grief in my heart, the sadness, the overwhelm, and really feel really a special connection to God. It started to feel sacred for a long time. And then that really helped me be able to get back into a better sleep rhythm. But it took a long time.
yeah.
It definitely did.
These
Yeah.
are all the elements of grief that many people don't understand until they've been there.
Yeah.
And that can endure for years after
Hmm.
bereavement.
Yes. What was so ironic was I had worked in the field of grief and loss with clients for years. I had worked in palliative care and then a lot of end of life discussions and so forth. And I thought, well, not that I got it all, no, but I felt like I had a really good handle on the process. And I was absolutely wrong. One of the good things that came out of this whole experience was that I changed my philosophy and the methods with which I interact with people that I found weren't helpful and were not therapeutic at all. And have really adopted a stance now more of listening and validating, much more so than trying to educate, because I can't tell you where your grief journey is going. You know, we can talk about what it can look like, but all I can do is really be a co-laborer walking in this journey with you, alongside you, and we're going to see where it goes, and I'll support you when we get there. So it really has shaped my practice in positive ways.
Sounds like it. And the memoir, Relaxing into the Pain,
Mhm.
that's available on Amazon.
It is, yeah. You can go to Amazon.com and just type in "relaxing into the pain." It'll pop up. You can also go to Westbow Press, which is the publishing company,
Okay,
um, for the book.
great. I will put links to that in the podcast description. It sounds like it'll be a memoir of love as much as grief, for sure. And I'd
Yeah,
love to get to know Patricia a little bit more. So, Mekel, I'd
yeah,
love to just bring the conversation to a different direction now. When we met on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, it was on some thread to do with grief, and I spotted you to Memoir, and made contact about coming onto the podcast.
yeah.
And since we made initial contact, everything has changed in the US.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a number of events, a series of police murders. There's no other word for it. And
Right.
George Floyd murdered, I think, 10 days ago
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it would feel completely incongruent not to speak about what's happening in the States and
Mm-hmm.
the grief. There's so much grief from so many people that
Yeah.
has been there for decades, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's just rising up now to
Mm-hmm.
be fully seen and fully
Right.
appreciated.
Yeah, I
How are you doing?
absolutely appreciate you bringing this up. I appreciate you bringing it up. You know, how am I doing? It
Yeah.
really changes moment by moment, to be honest. I think I, or like a lot of people, experienced an extreme sense of shock, but at the same time, it wasn't shocking, related to the years and experiences that people of color and people who are white understand is true about this country. And that is that there are systemic injustices. There are so many years of oppression and racism and injustices that people of color have endured. So in that sense, it wasn't anything new. So it's moment by moment. I think I started off as shock. I went through a phase of anger, honestly, about the fact that I think I told you earlier that I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and Memphis is known for being at the center of the civil rights movement. So to think that, not that this occurred here, but just to see the downfall of what's gone on since George Floyd's death has been tremendous, and in some ways very disappointing. That we've come from Dr. Martin Luther King, who, his memorial is 20 miles from my house. Yet here we go again, addressing the very things that he addressed in the 60s. It's saddening. It's saddening. Um, but I'm choosing to look at this as an opportunity for our nation, for our world, to say that, hey, we need to pull up the veil, take off the blinders that we've had on, and recognize the blind spots so that people don't have to continue to suffer and continue to grief upon grief, because it is like a scab being pulled back every single time something like this happens, for sure.
Would you speak about that grief of living in that society with so much oppression and injustice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I can speak as a Black woman, you're born, right? And you enter this world, and there's a pure innocence to how you believe the world is supposed to be, which is safe and secure and fair and predictable. And in the face of that, I think I realized early on, like in elementary school, that it wasn't quite like that. That people do look at you because your skin is dark, and they do question your right to be in certain spaces. So I knew early on that that was a problem, and that's really began the grief journey, right? I think a lot of my identity, in terms of probably being incredibly overachieving and incredibly perfectionistic, was driven by some of the racism and prejudice that I experienced early on as a child. And then
Prove your right to be in the world by
yeah,
overachieving.
yeah. And I think, like, even the message that I not necessarily directly received, but that I subtly received was, Mekel, because you are Black, you have got to work 10 times harder to get through the same door. And I went and followed that message. And what was ironic is that even beyond the door, right, you get there and you think, whew, I can finally relax because I've made it to this space where other people thought perhaps I would not get. And yet here I am again having to face. So it's almost like the ceiling is not really the ceiling. And you continue to realize that the bar is raised, which puts additional pressure on you. And you're grieving again. Wow, I thought I had this identity And now I've got to pull that off and deal with that, in addition to just collective grief. I mean, I think people of color have collectively grieved for over 400 years as Black people, stemming back all the way to slavery. And so not being able to fully express that and be understood within the context of your grief is devastating, right? And then to have these injustices occurring in America on the heels of other injustices. I mean, just a couple of months ago, there was a murder of someone, and then about 2 weeks after that, there's another thing. And then 3 weeks after that, there's George Floyd. It's just an incredible amount of tension and issues at place that really make it hard to grieve in any sensical way, if grief can be sensical at all. But it's definitely compounded the amount of grief
it's like
as a community.
Overload. And I think, when something I really, I've experienced and then I see in the people I support, is when someone we love dies and we go through this devastating, painful process, that's, the grief is one thing, but then when nobody else gets it, or lots of other people don't get it, or sprinkle platitudes on it, or invalidate it, that's just devastating. And, even me as a white woman, I've had to pull back off social media because I just feel furious at the people who aren't getting it. The all lives matter, all these slogans. It's like, come on, people.
Yeah.
And even just yesterday, you met them briefly earlier, my 10-year-old twins, two little Irish boys. And we live in a society that's not diverse at all in Ireland here on the East Coast. And they've been watching the news over my shoulder and asking me what's going on. And I'm trying to explain it to them. And, one of them plays this game called Roblox. It's a computer game. And he came down yesterday and he said, they have a store and they have T-shirts in there, Black Lives Matter. And I bought one, but it says All Lives Matter. And he said, isn't that a good idea? And I said, well, that's not as supportive, actually. And I explained to him and I gave him a couple of analogies. And he said, okay, I'm going to go up and change it and get the Black Lives Matter T-shirt to wear for my avatar. And his twin brother came in and got the tail end of this conversation and said, you're so stupid that, of course, All Lives Matter is just putting it down. Why did you buy that?
Right.
And if 10-year-old kids can get this.
Yeah, you would think that adults, right, experiencing diversity in what they see and experience every day would get it. What's interesting, and I think the best explanation of the All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter that I received was all lives do matter. Yes, of course, we are all created and we are unique and special and should be honored for being human beings. Absolutely. At the same time, our society has perpetuated the reality that Black lives have not mattered. And that is why there's an emphasis, right? So all lives matter when Black lives begin to matter.
Yeah.
Because our history is telling us that we don't matter. We're marginalized and disenfranchised and kind of seen as the outer portions of the society. So when we start to matter in the eyes of the people around us, then all lives will in fact matter. But right now, we're demonstrating that they don't.
I used for my kids, and this worked, the analogy, we live on this lovely street in this nice town, and I said, all the houses on this road matters. All the houses here matter. But if Margie across the road, if her house is on fire and we call the fire brigade, I need, that's who needs the fire brigade. Now, I can't come out to my gate and go, well, hang on, all of these houses matter.
Right.
It'd say to me, shut up, let's put out the fire. Yes, your house matters, but right now, your life is not in danger, hers is. So this is why
That's
we have
right.
to focus there, you know. Um, but
Yeah.
I'm
And
sorry,
right
I feel
now,
like I've kind of taken that off because I feel a rage about it. But,
no, and
you know,
I
how
honestly,
is that
I
for
do.
you to see this constant ignorance around
Yeah,
understanding?
I feel the passion as you were describing the house on fire. My mind went to that's exactly how persons of color, Black people, have felt day after day after day, is literally internally on fire. And I think that's why sometimes I think the outrage and the outward behavior associated with that internal fire is not completely understood. But another simple example would be, what if you continue to tell your sons the same instruction over and over and over again? You knew they understood it, and they continue to disregard. As a parent, you would be lying if you said you weren't going to get angry about that at some point.
Yeah.
And so, just liken that to 400 years of communicating the same thing, serving as a voice to the community, trying to assert yourself in a way that can be heard. And this is not to say that I agree with some of the ways that people are protesting and expressing themselves. At the same time, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it because I feel the fire burning within myself, and
I
have
feel it
been.
even now as a white Irish woman.
Mhm.
Literally, I feel the fire of it as we're
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah. It's tough. I think, one of the things I was asked to do earlier today was to write up a little article to talk about, the impact of all these things for kids.
Mm,
And as I was writing it and offering some strategies for doing that, one of the tips I offered was to be in control of yourself as an adult,
yeah.
because that helps our children, the kids around us, feel a sense of control and safety and so forth. And
Mm,
it reminded me that a lot of adults need to hear that. Whether you are a white woman in Ireland who's decided, you know what, I need to perhaps listen, right, and control my urge to speak out on something I may not fully understand, or even as a Black woman, I need to control the anger that I feel so that it's not manifesting in a way that the community is not going to receive.
yeah.
So we all need to focus on that. And I think that this system, this situation won't change until people take really hard looks at themselves. And I'm talking on a soul level.
Yeah.
That until we kind of, as you said, take off the sprinkles of the platitudes and things that we've used to gloss over the reality that people are dying, that people are hurting, and that people are grieving, it's not
Mm.
going to change. And so I hope that, this is part of that conversation to shift the needle forward today and in the days to come.
And I think, like Patricia would say, is put on your big girl pants and shut up and
Yep.
listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Shut up and listen. And for persons of color, don't stop fighting. Well, anybody, don't stop fighting. We've got to keep going and continuing to hear the voice of reason and the voice of truth, so that people like Dr. Martin Luther King and many other social advocates have taught us to do. Because if not, their deaths were in vain. And that just can't be acceptable.
Mm. So, what would your advice be for people who really do want to make a useful difference? Like, how do you feel the last couple of days? There's so many Facebook posts and tweets, and that's all great. And then what happens
Mm-hmm.
in 2 weeks when everybody's moved on to something else? There's another rush of grief. I remember
Yeah.
in my town a few years ago, a little boy died, and everybody turned their profile picture to his face. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember feeling so worried about it because I thought, what if when they turn back? I think my
Mm-hmm.
internet's gone a bit wobbly. Tell me if it's okay. When
Right.
they turn their profile picture back in a month or in 6 months or in 3 months, and the parents and the family are still deeply grieving, it's such a visible sign of we've moved on and you haven't. And so, so yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that? About this flooding of Facebook and And what's that going to be
Yeah.
like if it changes? And what are your hopes?
I'll liken this to, as you said, an experience that a lot of people who are grieving go through, which is a lot of rallying around the time of the death. And, you know, people are bringing, when my mom died, people were bringing pies and cakes and calls and texts and everything. 6 months down the road, though, it was crickets. And that's when, and this is not to criticize anyone in my social circle, those intimately connected to me were there.
Everyone
I
listening to this will identify. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but I think that it's in those moments we have to be more mindful. So as a recommendation to deal with that, I'll kind of give an example related to marriage and relationships. So a simple exercise with a partner, especially if you've been in a relationship with that person for a while, is to kind of remind yourself um, about the things that are important to the other person. Okay. Very basic example, but take out a sticky note, slap it someplace that you're going to see it, not just today, but in the days and weeks to come, to remind you that you still need to show up for the relationship. That it can't be, I'm going to give flowers on January the 1st, but I'm not going to give flowers for 2 years. So in that same way, I think as a community, we need to slap up the proverbial sticky note so that George Floyd's death, Breonna Taylor's death, Ahmaud Arbery's death, and many, many other people's deaths are not in vain. Because you're right. When things get back to normal, we're going to start getting back into our habits. And hopefully this has taught us with all of the protests that our status quo is not acceptable, that we're going to have to keep this at the forefront of our mind. I think conversations like this are important. And just getting out of your comfort zone with people who don't vote or look or speak like you is important so that these lives really do matter and that we can keep the conversation and dialogue going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like to anyone who says, "Oh, what'll I do when their friend is bereaved?" You know, I will always say,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't an event. This is their life now. You know, be in it for the long run. Keep showing up.
Yes.
Don't make
Yes.
pie week one. Make pie after a year. Make pie after 18 months.
That's right.
Remind them that you're still there.
Mm-hmm.
You're still on it. You're still aware.
Yeah.
And really, that's the
Yes.
message I'm hearing from you now as well. And I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of listening to be done
Absolutely.
more than
One of
answering.
the things that, yeah, one of the things that literally drove me nuts. Um, well, I'm a psychologist. I shouldn't say
It's okay,
that.
you can be nuts.
um, but what's completely annoying when I was in the beginning stages of my mom's death was people telling me how I needed to be grieving, or even saying things like, well, in 2 months, you're going to feel, or in 2 years. And I would look at them and just be disgusted, thinking, you can't tell me what my experience is going to be. What you need to be doing is listening. And so, very similarly with community grief, um, you know, come alongside someone, let them know, I see you, I can understand. Not I understand because you don't, but I can understand or help me understand what it is that you're facing. I just want to be a listening space and offer yourself up as that.
Mm,
If you'd be surprised how listening and allowing a person to express the deepest sadness in their heart is incredibly powerful. Um, just this last week, I had a colleague who happens to be a white man in his 40s, who I see as a friend and work together with. He stopped me because this was, I think, about 2 days after George Floyd's death. So I was in that rage, kind of anger moment, especially because for me, I was predicting, all right, justice may not be served given what we've seen in other cases. So he saw me and he said, Mekel, I just want to carve out an hour, 2 hours to talk with you, just, to check in with you. Okay. So we sit down, and I have to say that what he did so effectively was literally listen. And it wasn't even about, me educating him on what it means to be Black. That wasn't his intent. But it was more of, as a Black woman, right, in a city that is predominantly Black, but minority in the sense of ownership, coupled with the racial tension that's historically known here in Memphis. What has this past few days been like? And I cried, not outwardly, but inwardly, because I was so touched that he even cared. So it's those kind of conversations I think we have to have. And I know it was uncomfortable for him, but he did it anyway, and listened. And I literally walked away feeling refreshed, even though I came into the conversation feeling completely wiped out emotionally. So
You've brought
kudos to him.
you've brought a couple of points up there, Mekel, and again, just the grief of it all. Often we just want to be heard. We just want to be
Mhm.
witnessed. We just want to
Yes.
be validated in whatever we're going through without
Mhm.
being fixed, without
Right.
being offered advice, without,
Hmm.
without it becoming about anyone else. And
Right.
and that's true for whatever kind of grief we're experiencing. How can we show up and
Hmm.
just, I have a teacher who used to say, put your top lip on your bottom lip and keep it there, and that's the best grief support you can
Oh,
give.
I love that. I'm stealing that. I love that. Put your top lip on your bottom lip and just keep it there. Okay.
Well, we're
Yes,
trading.
I
So
will
I've
be
got
stealing.
put on your big girl pants and you've got put your top lip on your bottom lip. The other thing you said there was he wanted to just show up and hear how you are, and let you have a debrief, if you like, without trying to be educated. So what he was not doing was putting a burden on you to have to educate him.
Hmm.
And we talk
Hmm.
about this in grief all the time as well. When somebody is so exhausted from the burden of their grief, to then have to
Yep.
turn around to explain to other people what they're going
Hmm.
through and how other
Hmm.
people should show up for them or how other people can
Right.
support them, it's exhausting. And
It
this is
is.
something that I've seen shared on social media is stop
Yeah.
asking your Black friends to educate you. Go buy the bloody book yourself and educate
Hmm.
yourself. What would you
Now,
say?
I certainly think in the context of a quality relationship, friendship, that it's okay to say, I am a white woman and I can't understand the experience you've had. Are you willing, right? Are you willing to share some things that may be beneficial for me to understand? Now, that's different than imposing
Okay.
uh, yourself on a person to educate. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I thought I wanted to bring up was about putting the burden on people to tell you what they need. So when my mom died, and the same thing is true here, I think sometimes we will do well, if you need me, let me know. Well, the truth is, someone just died. The truth is, this man was just murdered. The truth is, we've had 400 years of the same thing going on. You already know. You already know that there's a need. And so instead of, again, putting that burden on me to show up for you, you just show up. You know that there's a need.
Yeah.
And so, again, back to just being present with people, just an incredible tool to help them heal, not to fix, but just to
Mm.
heal and let them know that their presence is seen.
Yeah.
Because that's really what we want, right? We all want to be and need to be seen, heard, and validated. At the end of the day, black, white, and every color in between, that's all we want, even in our grief.
And it's so important because otherwise you feel you're going crazy. How come the
Hmm.
rest of the world, people who are grieving will often say, the bottom of my life just fell out because someone I love died. And I'm
Right.
walking around in this surreal bubble of new normal, if you like.
Mhm.
And everybody, the sky is still blue and the
Yep.
sun is still shining and the buses are still running. And it's not congruent to what we're going through, you
Yeah.
know.
And again, I think there always has to be this balanced perspective in the midst of grief. I mean, I was sharing with a friend the other day that because she posted something on her social media that was kind of flowery and sunny and bright, and it was a expression of gratitude of something happening in her world. And she took it down, and I emailed her, and I was like, "Hey, I thought I saw this on your page." Well, she had taken it down because she felt guilty for posting something so uplifting and positive and light in the midst of the heaviness going on in our country. And I didn't scold her, but I did say, it's important, even in the midst of supporting other people who are hurting, to still shed light, to still shed hope, to create opportunities for them to see different aspects of what's going on. Because grief, as you know, can be incredibly myopic. And sometimes we can get so focused on that we do forget that the world's going on around us. So I think
Mm.
there's a space for those to happen simultaneously, and so that we don't feel like we can't have any sense of positivity in the face of what we're going through.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
But I'm curious, like what she shared or whatever the gratitude was it in
Mhm.
relation to what's going on in the world, or was it completely off topic? Because
It
I
was
think her
completely,
point
yeah.
of, the post-traumatic growth, or how can this awfulness make some positive change? I
Right.
saw a quick video of George Floyd's daughter today. I think she's only 6, and she was
Yeah.
on somebody's shoulder saying, "Daddy's changed the world." I get
Yeah. I
how
saw that.
important that voice is, but if it's something
Hmm.
totally different and unrelated, I get that she might have wanted to
Yeah.
go, where's my right to put something joyous and unrelated in a world that's grieving dreadfully at the moment?
Hmm. Yeah, it actually was something that was not related to
Oh,
what's happening with everything in the country. And she, like I said, felt really guilty that her post wasn't focused on that, but also that it was something that was positive and uplifting to her. She felt selfish for having done
yeah,
that. And, I understood that. At the same time, I just reminded her it's okay to still have moments in your own personal life. As a Black woman this week, there have been moments and things that I've posted of myself and my partner eating out for the first time because of coronavirus, and excited that we can sit outside and enjoy a meal outside of the house. And that's okay. I think it's okay to do that because it doesn't take away from the reality that
yeah,
we're still muscling through it. I think what it can do is communicate there will be life beyond this current crisis,
yeah,
whether it is a person who's experienced the death of a loved one, or the season of uncertainty with COVID 19, or the racial tensions, right? Now, hopefully, this won't be a season we circle back to anytime soon because we're more conscious of what's happening in the world. But there's always room for hope. And
yeah.
I think that we have to maintain that perspective so that we don't become crushed under the weight of loss,
Mm.
honestly.
And I think if it's there, then Mekel, hand in hand with the the ongoing nature of support, like in any
Mm-hmm.
grief and any loss, that
Mm-hmm.
we're not just in it in the moment, but post your lovely dinner out and then come back and support, come
Right.
back and keep showing up
Yeah.
to the grief as well
Yes.
as the joy. That makes it a lot more palatable then.
Absolutely.
You talked earlier, you brushed on community grief or collective grief. Would you say a few words about your understanding of collective grief, of community grief, what it
Mm-hmm.
is, and how it can be beneficial?
Yeah. So collective grief, similar to community grief, is really an experience in which, and I'll explain this by describing 3 concentric circles. So we are individuals, right, who live within communities, and those communities are part of our larger society. So in the instance of George Floyd, right, he was an individual, and his immediate contacts were his partner, his daughter, Gianna, in that community and so forth. And we can see the ripple effect of that. So collective grief is the sense of um, an individual experience really uh, rippling and having a cumulative effect on the larger society. And we've seen that over and over again with deaths. So you can imagine the sheer weight of that. Not only am I grieving as a Black woman individually, right, as I consider the life of this man who lived and was a father and a partner, but I have a brother who's also experiencing that, and he and I are in communication and relationship, in addition to the larger community within which I interact. So it really is kind of a cumulative awareness and experience of grief. And I think when you couple that with some of the bereavement practices, I can only speak for the Black community, right? We have very specific rituals with regard to funerals and wakes and just different processes that we go through to kind of move ourselves along the grief process. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So that's kind of collective grief in a nutshell. And then you mentioned, or you asked about the benefits of that. I think on one hand is the tremendous weight. At the same time, the collective grief experience does allow the entire community to shift as each one of us is supporting each other hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so we realize as a group that we're not alone. And that is an incredible gift along the grief journey, to know that you're not the only one who's experiencing something that is raw and
Yeah.
real and tremendously hard.
That someone is getting in the pit with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And while you feel like you're down in the dark, mucky waters, right? There's someone else who's trotting along with you, putting on their big girl panties right there to let you know that you're going to make it. It's important. It's important.
It's
Um,
extraordinary to see what's happened around the world this week. In Ireland, we're just kind of coming out of lockdown because of COVID.
mm-hmm.
We still have it's not a curfew, but we have to stay within 5 kilometers of our homes, and we're allowed to
Okay.
meet with up to 3 other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're allowed to sort of go out to a park or the beach and meet with 3 other people outdoors, not indoors,
Mm-hmm.
but no
Okay.
further than 5 kilometers from your house. Yet, after George Floyd's murder, there has been huge protests in Dublin City with
Mm-hmm.
thousands of people going, okay, it's like when we were chatting earlier, I was saying that the big thing in somebody's life last February was completely then
Mm-hmm.
overshadowed by COVID-19, which became
Right.
everybody's big thing, which I feel
Mm-hmm.
now is overshadowed again by George's death and all the
Mm-hmm.
tensions and all the protests that are
Mm-hmm.
happening around the world. It's almost like COVID has dropped down a couple
Yeah.
of notches and something else is more important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is the revolving door of life, and the constant treadmill that we're on, trying to make it through this race that
Yeah.
we call living. Yeah, it'll be interesting from a health perspective, right, to kind of see what this looks like in terms of COVID-19. Um, at the same time, I think that it's important not to say that COVID and awareness of precautions needs to be irrelevant, but the togetherness and the communal aspects of grief and the communal aspects of healing are incredibly powerful. Even if that means that we are hand in hand, literally arm in arm, and to have touch points to know, hey, I get it. I'm going to come alongside you physically to
Yeah.
let you know that I stand with you. But it will be interesting to see the impact.
Yeah. And I think even just on the psychological level of how, February, you had your big deal, whatever it was in our lives in February, COVID threw that out of
Mm-hmm.
the water. And now this is definitely, I mean, certainly from where I'm sitting, overshadowing all that we've been through with the virus. It's incredible times, isn't it, Mekel?
It is. So, my dad passed away in March, and
I'm sorry.
he used to always tell us, my brother and I as kids, that at one point, like, he was born in the 50s, and he went through a lot of the experiences connected with the civil rights movement and all these things that we're going through yet again. And he would always say that while he never wanted us to go through that, he's like, your eyes will be open to things you've never seen should you go through what I went through as a little boy.
Yeah.
And he's not here to see today, but here we are, right, experiencing that at an older age. And it is tremendous. It is overwhelming, and it is so incredibly complex that the solution to it, I know, won't be rapid by any means. But again, my prayer, honestly, is that this is an opportunity for the world to
Mm.
have its eyes opened, for people to look at themselves differently in order that they might look at other people differently. And hopefully, these opportunities, and even on the heels of COVID, or on the heels in the midst of COVID, which kind of pushed pause on all of our regular routines, hopefully COVID offered a space for people to reflect, so that on the heels of that, right, we're in a great place, a posture to connect differently than we did before the beginning of the year. So we'll
Do
have to see.
do you think that COVID and the big pause button that was pressed on the whole world, and therefore everybody's at home, they're paying more attention to the media, do you think that has led us to where we are today with the protests and or the movement in the States to end racism and end injustice?
Ooh, that is, Liz, that's a tough question.
Mm.
Um, I think that I can only speak for myself personally. What COVID-19 did for me, now again, this was literally in preparation for another major death in my life. And after COVID hit, um, it offered a space for me to cocoon and grieve very intimately with my family, which was needed. And it also allowed me a chance to go inward and kind of look at spiritually, how do I view the world? How do I connect with other people in different ways now that I've experienced another loss, which has benefited me. And honestly, George Floyd and all the other situations leading up to that, um, after kind of having this pause, I feel much more prepared emotionally to be dealing with this than if I hadn't had that break, if that makes any sense. Um, Now, it's actually interesting. I did a talk on COVID-19 and kind of outcomes thus far this past weekend. And one of the statistics I offered was that, while the data are very preliminary, we're seeing that people are really falling in one of two camps, which is COVID-19 made me realize that I'm not connected to the people with whom I thought I was, right? I was spending more time working and not really connecting with my wife, my husband, my children. And so this has created a space for me to do that. On the other end of the continuum is, wow, I didn't realize, the work required to do these relationships. And this may be the end of that. So human beings are interesting and intricate. And so it's hard to predict where people are going to go. But like I said, I am really hopeful that COVID has offered a backdrop for people to be able to rethink how they live their lives. And hopefully that's one that's much more reflective, because we absolutely need it. We can't,
Mm.
our society won't change without it.
And what sort of a world we want to go back to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been a lot of talks about the new normal, and not going back to the way things were, not going back to those systems or those structures and ways of thinking. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really say, hey, how do we want to do this now? What lessons have we taken from 2.5 months of being quarantined to then, expand as we move forward? So this is a ripe time. And again, I'm prayerful that we're going to move in the right direction.
Mekel, I want to book you in for part 2 in 3 or 6 months' time, where we could maybe reflect on what we don't know now, what's going to happen, and this hope
I'd
and
love.
prayer we're putting out, and meet in a few months' time and go, wow, this is how it all unfolded.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah.
Completely welcome the opportunity. It's uncertain. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see what the rest of 2020 has to reveal to us.
Well, let's put that in the diary sometime, the end of the summer. Let's see what's unfolded. Mekel, it's been such a privilege and an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you. The feeling's mutual.
It's really nice to meet with you, and thank you for your time. I know you had, oh gosh, we've been on for almost an hour and a half, so I know that you had about 9 or 10 hours of work before you came on with me. So thank you for being open to do that, and for being so gracious with my questions.
Absolutely. I appreciate you and the time. I know it's late in Ireland, and so it's probably time to go to bed. And so I appreciate you staying up a little later to accommodate the time here. And it's just been wonderful. So grateful for you.
Go have a nice evening, and go embrace that new partner of yours that's there. Hopefully they'll have cooked a nice dinner in the kitchen for you. No.
That's part of my hope for the future.
Okay. There's work to be done. There's work to be done.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, look, so lovely to meet you, Mekel. And sure, we'll keep in touch on Twitter, and I will let you know when the podcast will be out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Liz.